Okay, so one of the main reasons, one of the most important things to understand when you're setting up a character are deformers. There are quite a few different deformers in Maya. We're going to start out with the most simple ones and move on to the more complex ones throughout the class. But I'm going to cover, the majority of them are simple, so we will cover the majority of them here in the next day or two. So right now we're going to go over the nonlinear deformers. I'm going to create a new mesh so that will be more expressive to this. So we go to polygons, cube, and I'm going to give it some more resolution. We go to 20 divisions, give it a lot of geometry just so you can see what they're doing for sure. Okay, I'm going to snap this down to the bottom by holding down D and then pressing V. If I hold down D and then click the Y handle, okay. If I hold down D, it's hard to see because I got too much geometry. Sorry, let me change this down before I do that. Okay, so if I hold down D, it changes. I can adjust the pivot of this object. So if I hold down D, I click the Y handle, and then I hold down V and middle mouse click near the bottom of the mesh, and it will snap it right to the bottom. Okay? So I know that's a real quick move, but that's the easiest way to do it. You can also go into the pivot mode if you want to for your tool, your translate tool, and adjust the pivot by pressing the insert key on your keyboard if you have one. My laptop does not have one, and so in that case, if you feel like it's important to have that, in the past I've changed the hotkey for that to the home button, and the home button doesn't do anything memorable in my mind, so for Maya, so I've swapped that in the past. Anyway, so I'm going to snap. Now I'm going to snap the entire object to the center of the grid. Okay, so all I did was move it up, and I did that by holding down the X. So you can snap to the grid by holding down X and middle mouse clicking. And it'll snap it to the closest grid point. Okay, so with that done, I guess 10 subdivisions is plenty. I'm going to rename this. You should get in a good habit of renaming things when they're created. I'm going to delete history on it. You always want to delete history before you start rigging. You never want to have to delete history after you've started rigging. There shouldn't be any history before you start rigging. So with this box selected, I'm going to go, and I have the animation menu set, or I can go in my hot box and add the animation menu set in. I can go to create deformer, and there's this section called nonlinear. So I'm going to go through these real quick. They all have something in common that I will explain. So by selecting an object, by having an object selected and then selecting a particular type of nonlinear deformer, in this case I created a bend, then I can go through and modify this cube with that deformer. The main attribute of the bend is this curvature. If I adjust the curvature attribute, I can bend this cube around real easy. Now, something to note is all these nonlinear deformers are going to have this high bound low bound attributes. Now what those are, if I turn on X-ray mode, you can see the deformer in the center here. If I adjust this low bound, by default these are set to the height of the mesh so that it's placed in the center of the mesh, and then the, then the low bound will go all the way down to the bottom of the mesh and makes the deformer go all the way to the bottom of the mesh, I should say. And the high bound makes the deformer go all the way to the top of the mesh. So to show this, I'm going to select the low bound attribute, press Control on my keyboard so I can slow down how fast that adjusts. And you can see the length of that low bound changing, right? So I'm going to get rid of the low bound. And I can do the same thing for the high bound. But you'll notice it only bends the portion of the mesh for which the high bound reaches, and then everything after that just follows off in that trajectory. And that will be common to all of the nonlinear deformers. So you should play with that until it makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to set this to 1 again. And then I'm going to move this nonlinear deformer, this bend deformer, down to the bottom of the grid. In fact, I'm going to snap it there, holding down X. Okay, and so now it bends from the base of the cube. If I increase the high bound to 2, so to double what it used to be, and then I go through and adjust this curvature, then I can bend the whole cube evenly, and it's a nice thing. This is actually a really handy modeling tool. If I like how this mesh looks, all I have to do is select it and then duplicate it, and then I've got a copy of that mesh that has that curve to it for very little effort. Now, it's good to practice using these nonlinear deformers and repositioning them in different places. Now, to select the deformer after you've lost it, you'll have to use your status line to adjust what can be selected. So I'm turning off meshes here, and that'll make it so I can select the bend deformer. And now what happens if I move it to the left? I get a different behavior, and if I move it over here, I get another different behavior. It's important to just realize how these work. Okay, so I'm going to center it again. I'm going to go back to perspective view. And if I switch to my rotate tool, watch this. And I rotate it around, then the cube does this kind of rubbery kind of action. Okay, so that might be useful sometimes. I know particular in modeling, but you never know, you may need it for rigging. Anyway, that's kind of your bend deformer. So the position, its transform location matters. That's the main thing I wanted to point out. And the high bound and low bound can be used. You can control those to make it do what you want. Okay. Now, if a mesh has a deformer on it, then it has some history. If you delete that deformer, which I always get a student that wants to try to do this, but they say they want the mesh to stay this way, but they delete the deformer, then the mesh loses that history. There's nothing telling it to be bent anymore if you delete